Imagine this, you finally have time for yourself. You're done with work, you're done with chores, you're done with everything. In fact, what you're going to do is you're going to be setting up your space, pulling out your favorite colors, your favorite brushes, your favorite paper, and you've finally gone to the art store and bought all of these brushes, paints and papers that your favorite YouTube artist has recommended. And you're really excited to dive into a tutorial. You go in, sit down, mix your paints, start to paint, and as you're painting, you realize in horror that whatever that is turning out on your paper is totally different from what you see on the screen. That disappointment and frustration that rocks your body really makes you have all these feelings of self-doubt. Why did I even invest in this paper? Why did I even buy this brush? This paint is not working out. I spent so much money. This was supposed to be a happy time. Now you can go into this downward spiral of feelings, and wait, these feelings are not unique to you. In fact, I went through so many of these feelings when I first started out as a watercolor artist. Watercolor for me was a hobby that I picked out because I needed a distraction away from all of my infertility treatments. I wanted to go into watercolor to help me to find another outlet so that I was not going to be Googling about fertility treatments. In fact, I would be Googling about watercolor. So the danger about Google is that it tells you all of these various recommendations. But okay, I'm digressing. Let me just come back to you and share with you that today in our episode, we are going to be going through the reasons why some of your watercolor artwork does not match up to the YouTube tutorials that you are following. And I want to let you know that it's not you. Well, but it's also not the YouTube artist. It's not really anyone per se, but I want to take you through the various techniques that could result in differences in the way your painting turns out and the YouTube artist. If you have missed my last episode, I actually shared with you how material choice could be a reason for why there is that gap between your artwork and a YouTube tutorial's artwork. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. If you are new to my work, I am Jillian. I am grateful that you are here joining me today. I am a full-time watercolor artist who loves to show you how to embrace the mess and magic of watercolor. In today's episode, I'm going to be taking you through a couple of techniques that could result in differences in your artwork. I am going to start off with the biggest one, and this is water. Water is the biggest reason why so many of our artwork looks different to other YouTube artists' artwork. And this big elephant in the room, which is really water, is something that is so different across the screen. One thing that YouTube artists have difficulty communicating or sharing with you is telling you how much water we have in our brush, how much water did we use to mix a specific paint, how much water should we put down on our paper. And this was my biggest struggle when I started doing watercolor, especially when I had questions like, is her paper wet right now? Does she have a lot of water? Is that why she got a light color? How come her color looks different from mine? There were so many different questions that I had surrounding water. And this is also why watercolor is one of the trickiest mediums when it comes to painting. It's because of the paint and water ratio and consistency that could influence the way in which your painting turns out. You see, when I started watercolor, I just thought that water means just add water. I didn't really think about the nuances of adding water. I didn't think about the stages in which your paper goes through while it's drying. I did not think that if there's a blob sitting on top of your paper, that's actually going to lead to hard lines. There were so many different things that I didn't know. Now I know that I just spewed out a whole bunch of jargon. Let me just slow down and tell you a few things where water can really influence the success of your painting and also attribute to why it looks different to many YouTube artists when you are following their tutorials. Let me start off by saying that watercolor is a water medium, and in order for you to use water, you're going to have water in various spots in your setup. You're going to have water in your palette, you're going to have water on your paper, you're going to have water in your cup, water in your brush, and sometimes water in your paper towel. All of these spaces within your art setup is going to have water. As a result, it's going to influence the amount of water that goes on your paper as well. If you have got a lot of water on your brush and you dip it into your palette that also has water, and you dip it into your paper that is also wet and damp, this is where it's going to contribute and add on to the amount of water on your paper surface, which results in lighter colors because your paint gets more and more diluted with the amount of water that you're adding. And this is also going to make your paintings look a lot more washed out as compared to a painting that you see on a YouTube tutorial, depending on what they expect you to do. Now, whenever an artist on the other side is painting and they are mixing colors, we also don't know what the percentage of water they use in their brush, and depending on the brush that they choose, you don't know the capacity of whether or not that brush is able to hold water or whether that brush does not hold so much water. All of these different things put together can really influence your painting. So I know in the last episode we talked about material selection, but really what I've just described here is that your material selection is going to influence the way in which you use everything. So if you choose a brush that is natural hair, that tends to pick up a lot more water, it tends to be a lot wetter. The characteristics of a natural hairbrush is a lot softer, and the way in which it paints and creates marks is also very different as compared to a synthetic hairbrush, which also holds water in a different way. Now, I hope I haven't lost you yet. And if I have, come back, because I am going to take that guesswork out from you, and I'm going to be showing you how exactly to identify when an artist's paper is wet and when an artist's paper is dry when they are putting marks down. This is a common question that I get in most of my tutorials when people ask me, was your paper wet when you add on that layer, or was your paper dry when you did it? And I don't blame people for asking these questions, because like you, when I first started, I asked the same questions. And these are great questions to ask, because you are right. You need to know whether or not the paper is wet or paper is dry. And this is related to the stage in which the paper is drying. Now, I've gone through so many different things so far, I know, and they're all related to water. I want to bring you through an understanding of how when your paper is dry, you are going to get a lot more harder defined lines, and when your paper is dry and when you apply water or paint on it, it does not move or travel as much, so there's not going to be so much blends because your paper is dry. However, when your paper is wet, this is when you are going to see a lot more movements, a lot more blends, and you're going to see the paint move. So next time you are wondering that question, is her paper wet or dry? Ask yourself if you see the paint moving, because if the paint is moving, then your paper is still wet or it's damp. If the paper is dry, your paint is not going to move. So I hope that that has helped to take the guesswork away from you with regard to whether or not the paper is wet or dry. Great question, by the way. With regard to water control, another thing that you want to think about is the paper that you're using. So I talked about paper before, but this holds as such an important factor because when you are using 100% cotton paper, the way in which your paint moves and runs around is very different as compared to when you are using paper that has lower cotton content in the paper itself. Now think about it in this way. Apart from cotton, the other material that paper has is plywood or cellulose. Now these materials, now think about it. Plywood, if you put water on plywood, does the water get absorbed? It doesn't. Most of the time, it gets minimally absorbed and then it sits on top of the surface. Now this is where, when you're trying to create blends and movements, or you are trying to get the paint to travel, it can be really frustrating because the paint is just sitting on top of the paper and it's not really moving in the way that you actually see on the videos. Now if you see some of those videos where the colors are just exploding across the page and there's so much movement and all of that, but you don't see that same effect on yours, most likely you got to think about the paper that you're using. If you're also using 100% cotton paper but you are still struggling with the movement, ask yourself about the types of paint that you're using, because the properties of the paint is going to influence how the paint actually moves across the paper. And this is where I talked about paint selection, which you can find in the previous episode. Other than water control, the next thing that you really want to think about is your lighting. I took a 4-year break from watercolor because I wanted to focus my time on kids. The real reason was because I was so tired. It was so tiring. But anyway, I was so tired and I wanted to get back into watercolor, and the best time for me to do that was at night when my kids were sleeping, and I also felt like then I would get a longer stretch of uninterrupted time to paint. However, what I didn't realize was that when I was painting at night, I was using my lamp, which was an orange or warm tint. Now this warm tinted light meant that my paints all had a brown overcast to it or an orange overcast to it, which resulted in me seeing my blues as browns and also my reds as scarlets. I saw so many different colors that were not really representative of how my palette really looked like in the daytime. And this also could be a reason why the way in which lighting falls on our paints, our reference photo, or even the way in which we see things on screen is going to influence how we perceive things and translate it on paper. So depending on whether you're working in daylight or at night with a lamp, this is going to influence how your painting turns out, because the way in which we perceive colors depending on various lightings, even in daylight time, when it's sunset versus rainy versus when it's evening time, all of these different lighting and the way in which the light falls on our reference photo or on our paints, this is going to impact the way we translate it into our art. The third point was something that I covered earlier, where I talked about muscle memory. Now you need to develop a muscle memory for the way in which you use the brushes that you have. This is how you're going to learn how to paint loosely, especially if you want to paint loose florals like myself. Now, every time you look at a tutorial and you see that the strokes are so effortless, it can be very intimidating because you wish that you were also in that position. I want to let you know that I did not start out like that. I had so many different awkward strokes. I was not even able to tell how to hold the brush and differentiate between holding the brush like a brush or holding it like a pencil. I did not realize that using different parts of the muscles within your arms is going to produce different types of marks and strokes. I didn't even vary where I held the brush or even the angle. There were so many different factors that could influence the way in which the marks that I made appeared on the paper. So putting everything together, I hope that this has given you a broader perspective of how your artwork is truly unique to you. And really, whatever that you see on YouTube should be a guide more than a model. In fact, I would encourage you to hone and think about your own personal style right from the beginning. Now, a lot of us are always wondering what we mean by personal style. I would encourage you to start with going through Pinterest and pinning a whole bunch of paintings that you really want to emulate. These are often common themes that you'll be able to pull out, and from there, identifying the various techniques that are going to help you to get to where you want to be is really going to be key rather than following the next tutorial. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey as I share with you my thoughts and insights on how you can own your art. I would love to hear in the comments what are some of the tricky areas that you found in YouTube tutorials that were missing, and what ingredients you really realized were factors that could help you with your art. If you have not liked and subscribed these videos, please remember to do so, and I cannot wait to see you in the next episode.